All right. Here we go. All right, guys. It's Pride Month is almost over, and you'll notice we haven't addressed Pride Month on this show this year. Frankly, it's something I don't like to talk about most of the time for so many reasons. And I'm going to get into a few of those. This year in particular, today, in fact, is the 10th anniversary of the Supreme Court decision on gay marriage, right? The ruling by the Supreme Court that made same-sex marriage law. So, what to know about the Supreme Court ruling 10 years ago that legalized same-sex marriage in the U.S.? This is from the AP News this morning. So, we're going to take a look at this. We're going to take a look at this article, and then I'm going to explain to you why this was a huge mistake, a huge overstep by the Supreme Court, a clear violation of the law, and frankly, just aggravating on so many levels. And we've got a few things with regard to free speech and the like that we'll be talking about this morning as well, and another Supreme Court decision that's related, and the slippery slope. So let me tell you why I don't like to cover this issue and why it bothers me that I don't like to cover this issue, right? I have friends and family who are gay. I don't personally know a bunch of trans people because there just aren't that many out there, especially out here in the country where I live. You just don't run into them very often. I did have a cousin who I'll say it like that. I had a cousin. And I'll leave that one at that because it absolutely breaks my heart. I do know one hermaphrodite that I text with often, who's a good friend, and I really hope she sees this episode and sends me some vulgar text messages because I actually know that she's going to agree with me on 90% of what I have to say on this topic. But let's before I explain the slippery slope and tear this whole thing apart, let's take a look at the article. Real quick, Pitt Danny says, been working with the fire department to get my road passable. Huge tree. Man, I'm sorry, brother. I hate it for you, but I'm glad the fire department and the road department are there to work with you and help you with that. Out here, we got to just kind of grab our own chainsaws and tractors and go handle that shit ourselves. But, good on you, brother. And I'm actually glad to hear that you are able to get out and be a part of it and help do the work and get the work done. That was one of the first maybe 3-4 months after we moved here. The wife and I were in separate vehicles, and she had all the kids with her, and we were heading back from my folks' house, and we came across a huge down tree across the road. And it was one of those like first experiences out in the country where just a bunch of rednecks with chainsaws got out. And I did not have a chainsaw with me in my truck, but there were some other rednecks with chainsaws that got out, started cutting up the tree, and I just started hauling debris and brush away off the road, just chucking logs to get her done, and seeing the community, just, a community of people get together and say, you know what? Whatever, we got this. This is what we do. This is how we just handle business. Let's do it. And Pitt Danny says it broke the heat, my mailbox, driveway, and more. Thank God, not any houses. So yeah, we went through Helene. I still today have storm damage that I'm cleaning up on the property, but thank God nothing hit the house. So the house is fine. I've just got down trees all over the the back of the acreage that I'm cleaning up, which is the primary reason I just bought this big, beautiful tractor. Y'all, I'm going to have to do some videos of this tractor because this fucking thing's just awesome. Okay. The gays. Let's talk about this. I'm going to start off by reading through this article. We're going to talk about kind of the way that they spin things and try to make it sound a certain way. So, the Obergefell versus Hodges decision followed years of national wrangling during which some states moved to protect domestic partnerships or civil unions for same-sex partners, and others declared that marriage could exist only between one man and one woman. Okay, see, right here, they're telling you a sort of lie. Because for a long time, the argument was that marriage is a specific religious term of art that refers to the union between a man and a woman, and that a civil union, which would be a voluntary contract, not unlike marriage in that way, right? Civil union, domestic partnership, not unlike marriage, is a contract entered into voluntarily between two consenting parties. Two parties who are of sound mind and adequate maturity to enter voluntarily into a contract between one another. Now, for the question of same-sex union, that contract solves every legal question that can be posed. The use of the word marriage was done intentionally by the gay activist community to insult and deride religious people, not just Christians, although Christians primarily. Their hatred of Christians is actually alarming, because they don't hate Muslims. The gay lobby does not hate Muslims or Jews, etc., with the same visceral, volatile, vitriolic anger and rage that they hate Christians. Which, frankly, is amazing to me, because we do not have a whole lot of stories like, any of Christians, especially in America, just throwing gay people off of roofs as part of the government's policy on homosexuality. That is something that you see in primarily Muslim countries. Just do with that what you will. So, in plaintiff James Obergefell's home state of Ohio, voters had overwhelmingly approved such an amendment in 2004, effectively mirroring the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, which denied federal recognition of same-sex couples. That laid the political groundwork for the legal challenge that bears its name. Now, this is an important piece here. Voters had overwhelmingly approved such an amendment in 2004, effectively mirroring the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. The people voted against gay marriage. And one dude, who I guarantee you is one that screams about our democracy, et cetera, said, fuck your democracy. You don't get to play your game the way you want to play it. I'm going to hold out and dig my heels in, and I'm going to force the crowd to bend to my will. Now, it was, even commie lefty California, 5 years after this, 4 years after this, it was, I forget, it was 2006, 7, somewhere in that 2006, 7, 8 area. I don't remember. I don't remember exactly which, but it was while I happened to live in California that they were arguing same-sex marriage uh, in the law in California. I think that was Prop 8. And I remember back then, I made some comments about it at a poetry slam that I was doing, and I commented on it several times on stage in front of an audience. And back then, and I'd be willing to bet a lot of you guys watching the show this morning had similar beliefs, similar thoughts on this topic. I was having a conversation with a buddy yesterday about this. In the 90s, when we first started hearing about this, and Defensive Marriage Act and Don't Ask, Don't Tell were put into law by Democrats, signed into law by Bill Clinton. Back then, the argument we were told is, listen, what two adults, consenting adults, do in the privacy of their own bedroom is nobody's business, and especially not the government's business. Now, that was not an argument for gay marriage. That was an argument for tolerance. And back then I said, you know what? That's reasonable. That seems fair. What two consenting adults do in the privacy of their own home is nobody's business. Whether it's sodomy or they want to use illicit drugs, what two people do in the privacy of their own home, adults, consenting adults, right? I'm not talking about wood chipper Americans here. Consenting adults. As long as nobody's getting hurt against their will. I mean, I guess the same argument extends to the furries and the BDSM weirdos out there. But point being, be cool, yo. But that's what we were told, is that what two people do in the privacy of their own home is nobody else's business. Now, at the top of this, I said, I don't like to talk about this topic because I know people, because I have friends and family who are in the orbit of that LGBTQ community. And I said, I don't like to talk about this topic because of that. And it aggravates me that I don't like to talk about this topic because of that. Because that is part of the plan, part of the agenda. Right? We've talked about the problem with public schools indoctrinating children, feeding them garbage books. And we're not just talking about, oh, well, okay, here's a healthcare class, sex education class. And while we're explaining the birds and the bees, let's make sure that we mention that, some people do things different. Some people are into this and that. I mean, I went through a public school health education class in the very early 90s, and they weren't instructing us on, they weren't telling us about BDSM. They weren't telling us about furries. They weren't telling us about trannies and stuff like that. They would mention that there are things called homosexuals. There are people who have sex merely to satisfy their baser pleasure instinct without any interest in producing children. Right? Now, that always struck me as odd when I was younger. And still today, I don't, you'll hear people say they don't believe that transgender people are a thing. And I agree. Transgenderism is a mental illness. It is a cognitive dislocation of the physical locus of your individual identity. It is indeed a DSM-5 listed mental illness known as gender dysphoria. It is when your mind is broken from reality. Right? Similarly, I don't believe in homosexuals because sex, by definition, by definition, is the productive act of a bifurcated species to the generation of progeny. If the thing you're doing cannot possibly result in the production of progeny, it is not sex, and therefore it is erroneous to refer to it as such. When you say that a person is homosexual, you make a category error where you don't understand what the word sex means. It's like complaining about the flavor of your scoop of chocolate ice cream, and then you hold it out to your buddy, and you're like, "Here, try this chocolate ice cream. Tell me if that doesn't taste like shit." And then your buddy looks at you and says, "That is shit. It's not ice cream. Clearly, you don't understand what ice cream is." Right? Words mean things for a reason. Lefties don't like that. But here's the thing. Part of the plan, part of the activity of the activist left and their perversion and indoctrination of the children. Because remember, right, we're talking about the abortion up until and after birth. Lefties don't have children. They have your children. That's why there's a public education system. That's what it's for. That's what the DOE exists to do, is to corrupt your children. And then what happens? One of your kids says that they think they're gay. One of your friends says that they think they're trans. Right? And now because you know someone who you care about, and they've told you that they care deeply about this issue, you may still think, okay, we'll just talk about other things. And then you never voice your opinion. And I'll give it to him. It was a very clever maneuver, a very clever tactic, right? It was a very effective and clever way to chill speech, to not quite directly to censor speech, but to chill speech and to make it difficult to hold or express opinions on a topic that, let's be frank, absolutely matters. But they did us a favor. They did do us a big favor. They gave us the irrefutable evidence that the slippery slope is not a fallacy. It is a prophecy. It is an absolute guarantee. Just like the argument that what two consenting adults do in their home in private is nobody else's business. Just 30 years elapse, and we've got politicians being elected on the promise that they will use taxpayer money to mutilate children. And here's where that shit gets crazy. How do you even get from what two consenting adults do to taxpayer money is being used to mutilate children, and have those things even be related? Guys, I'll tell you this. I made some predictions and had some expectations. Oh, I never could have imagined it going this far. But y'all remember, essentially the day after Obergefell was decided, we immediately started hearing about the bathroom controversies. It was, they had it ready to go. They had flyers printed. They had T-shirts printed. And it was like, okay, gay marriage passed. And immediately we're hearing that, you know what? We need tampons in little boys' rooms. What? What? That right there, that is actually one of the important problems with the NGOs. We've talked about USAID being defunded, the NGOs losing their money. The thing that happened when Obergefell went through the Supreme Court and Roberts betrayed the Constitution again. I'll get back to that in a second. And then immediately they switched the trans issue, right? This is a major problem with activists and NGOs, nonprofits, etc. In theory, those organizations are supposed to exist to solve a specific problem. Those organizations are businesses. They are called nonprofits, but that's a fallacious. There is no such thing as a nonprofit business. That does not exist. The idea that it is a nonprofit is a lie. But the thing about those businesses, you've got the people that work for the business. That is their livelihood. And so if the business, the NGO, the activist group, the nonprofit, etc., if they successfully solve the problem that they set out to solve, right? Forget whether you think it's a problem or not, right? Gay rights activists never actually had a problem that needed to be solved because we have rights in this country. Unless unless you're a communist, the Civil Rights Act covers you. So the idea of, I'm not going to bother getting down the rabbit hole on all the equal rights arguments are actually arguments for special rights for victims groups. But if the NGO, the activist organization, the nonprofit, etc., if they solve the problem that they set out to solve, then there's no more reason for them to exist. In a very practical political sense, that's why the slippery slope is a guarantee. Because if your business is getting gay rights, gay marriage over the finish line, and you do that, your job just went away. Now, even before Obergefell passed, we saw things like pedophilia being removed from the DSM-5 as a mental illness and being listed legally as a preference or an orientation. We were told that we should refer to pedophiles as MAPs, minor attracted persons, instead of calling them what they should be called, which is pedophiles, pedos, pederasts, or wood chipper Americans. And I hate to use that last term because I'd rather they weren't Americans. Now, in fairness, the wood chipper solves that problem too. Now, the Obergefell decision was a major mistake. And let's talk about that for a second. It was a mistake. This was actually a loss for the gay community. So let's forget about what our opinions are on gay marriage, etc., and talk about what I mean there. The Obergefell decision could have been a good decision. It could have been a very powerful landmark decision that actually made a lot of important changes in U.S. law, right? The Supreme Court could have looked at the Obergefell case and said, okay, nowhere in the Constitution is there an enumerated power for the government to intercede in the institution of marriage. There is nothing in this document, in the Constitution, that says the government can regulate or even make regular marriage between two peoples at all. And so there cannot be laws against same-sex marriage It cannot be prohibited because the Constitution does not enumerate that authority to the government. Okay. Now, in that case, it could have been that some states would have had same-sex marriage and some states would not have. And that'd be fine. That'd be fine. If they had gone that route, if they had done it correctly and gone that route and made the argument that the Constitution does not say that the government has the authority to regulate this thing, then Obergefell could have been referenced to overthrow this. This would have been a major win for the lefties, especially. They could have used that as a reference to get rid of drug laws, to deregulate, decriminalize all illicit substances, because it's the same argument. There's no direct enumerated authority in the Constitution for the federal government to control substances. They have to do that through an argument based on the Commerce Clause, which says that the federal government shall make regular trade between the states. Then they have to argue that drugs are traded across state lines and therefore we have the right to regulate it, which is still a fallacious argument because it does not say to regulate. It says to make regular. And they were very clear in the letters that the point is that Georgia gets to sell cotton to Mississippi and Alabama doesn't get to charge them a tariff. That's what it means to make regular trade between the states. It's a simplification, but it does not mean that the federal government gets to tell you what you can and cannot trade. That is not within their wheelhouse. Instead of making a decision that got them the win they wanted, being gay marriage in some states or most states, but probably not all states, and then opening the door to clean up a bunch of unconstitutional laws by making the 10th Amendment argument. Instead, they went with the 14th Amendment argument and made the argument that that allowing marriage between heterosexual couples, allowing marriage and not allowing gay marriage was discriminatory. And under the 14th Amendment, it meant that the law was not being applied equally to all persons. They made that argument. And so they converted what could have been a good argument into an argument that is not even grounded in legality. Created a situation where they're legislating from the bench because they went from the government doesn't have instead of arguing that the government doesn't have the authority to regulate in this matter, they said not only does the government have the authority, which is not enumerated in the Constitution, to be involved in this matter, but we are determining at the Supreme Court that the individual states, which, by the way, are supposed to be sovereign entities, joined in a union, United States, under a centralized federal organ that is meant to foster cooperation between the several sovereign states where laboratories of democracy experiment and prove out principles of liberty and prosperity. Instead, they said that we at the Supreme Court are determining that you at the state levels must affirmatively take an explicit, specific action. You must require institutions which perform marriages to perform marriages whether they want to or not. You must criminalize the religious principles. So they made a 14th Amendment argument to violate First Amendment guaranteed principles. They made an illegal, unlawful decision and wrote law commanding affirmative action in the Supreme Court. That is legislating from the bench. That is judicial activism 101. And it is a crime. The usurpation of the individual authorities of the several of the three distinct branches by a branch which is not enumerated that authority or delegated that authority is a violation of the Constitution. Right? I mean, quite simply, under Article 3, Section 1, where it talks about judges serving in good conduct, I think there's a very good argument to be made that everyone who was on the Supreme Court in 2015 and did not write a letter of dissent against Obergefell was suddenly serving not in good conduct, or I'm sorry, not in good behavior is the language used in the Constitution, and should have immediately been removed from the bench. Right? So, as soon as it passed, we're in a situation where the outcome of it is very vulnerable to challenge because it's so patently unconstitutional and illegal. And then we get taken down the slippery slope to from consenting adults in the privacy of their own home to mutilating the children. Now, the Supreme Court has redeemed itself somewhat just recently. Let me see if I got this one right. Yeah, there's the article. Okay, takeaways from the Supreme Court's historic decision on transgender care. The conservative Supreme Court dealt a significant blow to transgender Americans on Wednesday. Okay, why is it that when we read these articles, why didn't the articles? This is one of those tricks they do. This is from CNN, right? Have you ever seen CNN? Like, say, for example, when Obergefell passed, did they say the liberal Supreme Court won a major victory? No, they said the Supreme Court. But no. Of course, now it's the conservative Supreme Court. The 6-3 ruling, which landed at a moment when transgender Americans are facing political and cultural setbacks after years of gains, a Tennessee law that banned puberty blockers and hormone therapy for minors seeking to transition match their gender identity. Okay, let's be very clear on this. This did not affect any. This line did not affect any transgender Americans. Okay, this Supreme Court decision has had zero effect and will have zero effect on transgender Americans because there's no such thing. Now, what it may do, what we can hope that it does, is it forces medical professionals who are engaged in malpractice at present by prescribing castration drugs to little boys to turn them into at least aesthetically little girls. We can hope that some of these medical practitioners will be forced to stop doing medical malpractice, and instead of pretending like you can chop a person up and mutilate their genitalia and magically transform them into a thing that they are not and never can be, instead you can refer them to a psychiatrist or a psychologist who can correctly diagnose their gender dysphoria and treat that either with appropriate medication or more probably with time, since gender dysphoria has an extremely high desistance rate, and the vast majority of minors who exhibit the mental sickness of gender dysphoria, the vast majority of them essentially grow out of it. And that's I mean, that is what the science tells us. One of the tricky things about the whole transgender argument is there's very little science on the matter. It hasn't been a legitimately studied phenomenon for a very long time. If you go back to, I think it's the 60s with the Dr. Penny experiments, where he took a couple of twins and raised one of them as a boy and one of them as a girl. And of course, both of the John Money twins eventually committed suicide because of the grotesque experiments that were conducted on these poor little boys. That's essentially the entire originating body of academia on the subject matter. Is you had one sick fuck who took two little boys and conducted psychological torture and medical experimentation on them so that he could artificially create a body of academia and academic publication for his peer-reviewed journals to forward his career and introduce this grotesque ideology. That is the originating body of the entire psychological, sociological, and anthropological science on the matter, is John Money's torture experiments. So, okay, I'm running a little over. I've got some other stuff that I want to get to. There was, oh damn. Okay. Wow, I've got a lot. I've got a lot of articles pulled up. Let me see where I need to start with. Okay. We'll go to this one. So, this is some video from a security camera in downtown Atlanta Police Department. These 4 kids have been arrested. They're going to be charged as adults, most of them, even the 17. So you got, apparently it's a couple 18-year-old, 17-year-old, and a 16-year-old. They grabbed some pride flags and they tore them up at the Pride Rainbow crosswalks in Midtown Atlanta. It says security camera shows a group of male youth slashing pride flags, and they've been arrested, and they're talking about charging them with a hate crime for destroying the trans flags. They're flags. I've been told over and over and over again that it's pretty clear that the Supreme Court has been very clear on this. Destroying flags is free speech. Burning the American flag in America is apparently protected free speech. American flag at a business, at a federal building, right? Carry one down there. Let's see. I've got several of these. Right, here they are at the Capitol, setting fire to an American flag on the ground. Guys, this infuriates me to see. Right, and screaming Allahu Akbar. Oh, here's another one. These pieces of shit took down an American flag, burned it, and replaced it with their own foreign flag. Okay, but none of that is hate speech. Oh, none of that is hate speech. This is. Apparently, this is hate speech. I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. It's hate speech to burn the pride flag, but it's not hate speech to burn the American flag. No. In fact, hey, fans of Obergefell, How about your 14th Amendment argument for equal protection under the law? Either it is hate speech to burn the American flag, or it is not hate speech to burn the pride flag. Now, fair play. Let's go ahead and accept the First Amendment speech argument. And I'll grant you this. These boys should probably pay a fine because apparently they took the pride flags down. They went to a display in Midtown and tore the pride flags down near the crosswalk there. So, destruction of property, sure. Vandalism, okay, cool. I'm fine with that. Charge them with vandalism, certainly. You see those cheap little flags that they've got, though, right? You see those cheap little flags they've got there, right? How about the in the images that I showed you a second ago? Oh, damn, I closed those tabs. But the giant flags that they were tearing down, like this one, right? This is Black Lives Matter protesters in D.C. on the 4th of July, stomping on an American flag and eventually setting it on fire, right? That flag is federal property, and that is a big, high-quality American flag. That's probably a couple $100 worth of American flag, if not $1,000, because it's a big-ass flag, versus the little, $20, $30 flags that the young men in Atlanta burned, or they didn't even burn them, they ripped them. And, fair play, burned, ripped, whatever, they destroyed the property, granted. Destruction of private property and destruction of federal property are two different crimes. They're charged differently. One is more serious. And the amount of damage is absolutely a factor. Like the value of the property destroyed is absolutely a factor in that. There's no way these boys should even be talked to about having destroyed those flags, even as a matter of enforcing the law against the destruction of private property, unless and until every case where a person can be identified in video burning, destroying an American flag, especially those that are torn down from federal buildings, as they so often like to do, until every one of those motherfuckers is in jail, or at least having to reimburse the government. And let's be real. When we say reimburse the government, I mean me. I mean you. I mean the taxpayer. Until every one of them has had to reimburse the government for the destruction of private property, of federal property. Right? Until they've had to pay those fines, there's not even a conversation to be had here. We will not continue to tolerate. We should not continue to tolerate this double standard. Rules for thee, but not for me. It's insane. But that's where we're at today, right? That's where we're at today. Is basically the Chinese Communist Party has infiltrated the Democrat National Committee. The DNC has infiltrated all manner of the deep state, including our law enforcement institutions. And we no longer have law enforcement in this country. What we have is Democrat political platform enforcement. The law is not enforced unless you are a conservative who can be made to appear to have broken a law by being accused through some violation of the party position of the Chinese Communist Party. Your small town cops and sheriffs, they're probably still okay, but you get into the city of Atlanta, New York City, Los Angeles, the police there they might as well be part of the Chinese Communist military, of the People's Army of China. That's what they are. They are the violent enforcement wing of the Democrat Party. They hate you, and they want you to die. All right, guys, I'm going to put a pin in it right there. I got to get on down the road. So thanks for watching this morning. Keep an eye out. I'm probably going to have to pop up a couple of extra videos this week because we missed a few earlier this month due to power outages in the studio, and I still got to get my hours in, baby. So y'all keep an eyeball out. There will be some random pop-ups. And I'll, fair play. A few of those random pop-ups may just be me playing video games. But y'all keep an eye out and be safe out there, guys. We love you, and we will see you tomorrow. I really do hate talking about the gay issue because, Yuri Bezmenov was right. They're just gonna tear down the whole country by demoralizing us through academia.